thank you all for being here. Well, we're all on this side of the room. Hello. I'm going to kind of take us on a little bit of a trip here. We're going to go a bit to Ecuador, but mainly to Peru. We're going to go to the upper Amazon, and we're going to see what's happening there. And I want you to think for yourselves a little. What does this mean for the environment? What does this mean for human-nature relations? Is this a different thing? Is this all interconnected? Spoiler, it is all interconnected. But who are the indigenous peoples? Are they the guardians of the forest? Are they somehow in the way of conservation? We'll see the different perspectives, and I hope to steer you in a certain direction, but I hope you also will think about it a little for yourselves. All right, so we all have some myths and perceptions about Amazonia as a place of untouched nature. So you think forest, rainforest, wilderness, nothing out there, a few dotted communities along rivers, maybe in the middle of a clearing, etc., leaves everywhere. This is Amazonia, but Amazonia is also cities. Amazonia is also cleared land. Amazonia is the wildfires that we saw, or the deliberate burnings, in fact, that our guest speaker showed in her presentation as well. Amazonia is all of these things. There's such thing as urban Amazonia. So we've already talked a little bit about this. Brazil has most of the Amazon, but also France, right? French Guiana is actually France, believe it or not. France borders Brazil, which I always find very interesting. We have Suriname, former Dutch colony, Guyana, British, where English is spoken, and then all of these Hispanic countries, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, all contain bits of Amazonia. So Amazonia is incredibly diverse culturally on the indigenous level, vastly diverse, in fact. Diverse ecologically, lots of different microclimates, microenvironments, but it's also diverse in terms of the states, the governments that actually preside officially over this region. 8 countries in total. Really important, as we all know, for biodiversity, for climate. There are sort of rivers in the sky, etc., etc. It's a wonderful place ecologically, but what about the human element? So off we go. That's me doing some of my field work. Let's go to Amazonia. I've worked a lot in Ecuador. You see this upper Amazonian landscape. When we say upper Amazon, that's what we mean, this kind of mountainous area covered in trees, sort of within the Amazon basin, but still incredibly high in terms of elevation compared to the rest, because a lot of Amazonia, you Floridians here will know, is swampy, low, flat, etc. But when you clear it, becomes good cattle land, which is exactly what people want to do, to turn Amazonia into cattle grazing land. When I say people, I mean primarily states and economic interests. Say no more. So romp through Ecuador, its indigenous diversity. I was starting to form a lot of perceptions about what Amazonia was in very remote places like this, where even the life of the city was starting to enter in minuscule ways. The youth listening to Bad Bunny on their phones. It's happened to all of us, I guess. As well as cellular coverage, right? Mobile phone coverage in some areas, internet. People could switch the internet on and off, but probably in 10 years it will just be there fully. What do I normally study? I study something called idiophones, which are sound effect words. You think comic book words like thwack, wang, whoosh, etc. People use these in a vast array in their daily communication in the Amazon, often imitating the natural world around them. So I try and go to these very remote areas where the city touches the least, let's say, and to hear the sounds of nature and of let's say, the emotions of the rainforest coming out through the language. But this is being threatened increasingly. Here are some videos of these things. I encourage you to check them out. There's a wonderful repository on a website called Quechua Real Words, where you can hear all these beautiful descriptions, let's say, or imitations of the forest coming up. As I say, the city is encroaching, and with the city encroaching and access to Amazonia, you might think the classic things we already talked about: loggers, oil drilling. If you don't know, I mean, forget the Middle East. Venezuela, other countries like this are famous for oil, but so too Ecuador, Peru, etc. Oil drilling is a massive industry. But on the backs of missionaries and the petrol companies, the oil companies, comes tourism. And since we've been talking a lot about literature, I'll tell you about a great Dutch book, which I would recommend all of you read. There are now translations in English, Spanish, French, etc., Portuguese, you name it. Ilja Leonard Pfeijffer, my favorite Dutch writer whom I had the honor to meet in The Hague 2.5 years ago, he wrote a wonderful book about the fate of Europe called Grand Hotel Europa, this kind of Grand Hotel Europe, where you can sort of imagine all of these kind of old characters of Europe coming together, and it's sort of an ode to nostalgia for Europe, but at the same time it problematizes mass tourism, where there is nostalgia and things being lost, where the modern world has, slowly, incrementally developed in Europe. You still have all the traces of the past, and people flock to Europe, treat it as a sort of amusement park. Well, you might say, okay, that's fine, that's a European problem, because Europe has all of this very concrete infrastructure of history, castles standing in stone, things like this. Well, much less so in Amazonia, where things are made of wood and the tropical climate erodes so much of this. But people have a sort of nostalgia also for the wild, right? For the nature of Amazonia. The trees are the cathedrals, as some people have said, things like this. So, I think I would love to make a rebranding of Ilja Leonard Pfeijffer's book as Grand Hotel Amazonia, where people go to these eco-lodges and they walk around as if in an amusement park. Amazonia is becoming an amusement park on its edges, where people are entering from the cities. People take a flight from Lima, for instance, Peruvian, so it's a domestic flight. You go to the Amazon and then what? You come up against this beautiful nature, etc., maybe in an incredibly deforested city where one little kind of square kilometer is still rainforest, and you go in, you enter, and you go, yes, I'm in nature, I'm in the rainforest, I'm in the jungle. And then some indigenous people come and they sort of get out of their jeans and other things, dress in these traditional clothing and perform for you, a dance, something like this. This is very common. And although we like to see the revival and the continuation of customs, this kind of performative, almost fake aspect of it, this is more problematic, actually. And this is something that, again, is also happening, has happened in Europe for generations, people walking around, historical reenactors, but then we know it's historical. If someone's dressed, sort of a Renaissance fair at a castle in Europe, you go, okay, well, fine, we know that people don't dress like this in Europe to this day. Much as people might think based on my accent that I come from the set of Bridgerton sometimes when I'm walking around Florida, people know deep down that I don't. The problem is with indigenous peoples in the Amazon, even people within their own countries, from the cities, from Lima, from Bogota, from Quito, these capitals, etc., go in and go, this is how they live. Nothing's changed, and they see it as an idyll. It's almost a kind of Eden image projected onto that, and it's just not the case anymore. Whilst at the same time the actual day-to-day culture is being lost and sort of distorted by the life of the city, or changed in a neutral perspective. But again, we sort of have this weird dual preservation. Either the indigenous cultures are extinct, or they're like they've always been. And the difference, I would say, with Europe is that it's a lot more sudden, less gradual, and again, doesn't get preserved, so we can live in this fantasy whereby it's all or nothing. It's like it always was, or it's disappeared. But the reality is, of course, neither. Like all humans on Earth, cultural change happens, but so too do these interests, economic or otherwise, prevail? So, for instance, you go to a place called Lamas, you can see the outlines of a castle here. There's an Italian castle built in the middle of Peru in a place called Lamas, right above an indigenous district called the Waiku in Lamas. So if you see there, actually, a lot of those hills are deforested completely. And yet this is sold as a ciudad en la selva, a city in the rainforest, in the jungle. Well, it is and it isn't, right? And yet it is a living indigenous town as well as a sort of mestizo, i.e. the kind of dominant population in Peru, mixed population that we consider in the US we would call Hispanic, live there too. And it's sort of a dual town with two heads. And again, when I'm there studying the language and culture of the people, etc., I'm seeing all of this, that there's tourism there, people from Lima in their droves, getting out of buses, everyone puts on their outfits, dances for 2 minutes, and then they go, oh, we saw indigenous Peru, how amazing, right? And yet, of course, the goal is to then sell bracelets, trinkets, chocolate, coffee, etc. to these tourists from Lima. Now, of course, people need to make their living, but we can also realize that this is also a real situation out of the economic necessity, but also a fake situation in some other ways, sort of created by that need to sell such things. These are some of my videos, again, from when I go. Really exciting stuff, this kind of high rainforest area. This is a place without tourism, Yurilamas, but it's a day's walk, which is both remote and not remote for people. It's close enough and yet it's not there yet. So this is a great example of a place with no tourism yet, people are very authentic, etc. And yet that is on their mind. They're now thinking, okay, is this a way we're going to make money? And it's in a place called the Cordillera Escalera, this mountain range where you can see this amazing, beautiful, lush landscape is partially touched, but largely untouched. It's one of these pockets, because Amazonia is now full of pockets that allow kind of great biodiversity to be achieved, to be maintained, and yet all around it is being deforested. Another place, Chasuta, is here, another community. This is next to a town, so this is a town that receives tourists, and yet I would say they do it right. It's not mass tourism as such. It's a steady flow of people, nationally, internationally, but with the goal of buying the known products of the area, like ceramics and chocolate. This is my friend, the chocolate maker, and her aunt. And they have this business called Munaiki Chasuta. If you ever go there, I would recommend it. But let's go to the Cordillera Azul, which is just south of that. So it's making like, there's a river here, you have this mountain range that we just talked about, the Cordillera Escalera, and then you have the Cordillera Azul just coming off of it, just divided by a small river. This nature park, it was made in 2001. Indigenous people woke up one day, found they were living in a nature park. Hadn't lived in a nature park before, but they're living in it now. They were not allowed to fish or hunt or do anything because, of course, they're in a nature park. You can't do that. You can't touch the animals. You can't touch the wildlife. You can't cut down trees, even if you need to make a raft, nothing. So, what happens? They fought for their rights. We heard earlier in the keynote about fighting for rights, indigenous rights. The people said, no. We understand the need to preserve nature, but that's what we've been doing more or less for thousands of years, they say, our ancestors and their ancestors before them. So we stand, we fight, and they won the court case. They said, we weren't consulted enough, this is illegal effectively, we have rights too, we can't just wake up in a nature park. And even if we are in a nature park, you need to make concessions to us because we need to be able to continue our lives. We're not the ones chopping down the entire rainforest, we cut down the odd tree. You, the Peruvian state, you cut down so many. You give logging rights to people from all over the world, international companies. You allow people to drill for oil. What have you ever done to protect these places? And now you're telling us that we live in a nature park because you're so guilty of this that you have to sell carbon credits, which is basically sort of a way to offset guilt, right? So basically people are Shell and other big polluters say, hey, we're super green because this Cordillera Azul place exists in Peru and there are trees there and we're keeping them standing and we're, both kind of paying for it, making money somehow in a weird kind of bizarre way off of these carbon credits, which is becoming its own kind of like prestige currency, let's say, within the greenwashing world. So you can say, we're super green. Shell will tell you, hey, nothing wrong. When you fill up the car with Shell, you're not doing a bad thing, you're doing a good service. But the reality is not so. And the local people have seen nothing of this money. So again, this is Amazonia as well. You can see an almost savanna-like landscape where once there was deep rainforest. Now, some places like this are natural, of course. There is some grassland naturally occurring in Amazonia, but not this much, and not everywhere. But that's what's happening, is it grows back. Because life grows back, right? But it grows back like this. It takes hundreds of years to grow a forest back. Not 10 years, not 5 years, on the scale that a company can provide, right? It takes so much more time. And even towns like this, Balsa Puerto, a Shawi town, the Shawi indigenous people, many women dress traditionally, and it looks in some ways very, quote-unquote, exotic to people from the city, and yet, in some ways, it functions like any other Peruvian town. You know, this too is Amazonia. So, don't get me wrong, I think in general, we can say the indigenous peoples have gotten the short end of the stick. That, again, they are good stewards of the natural environment. But people are people too. Where there are economic interests, where money dominates too, you will see the rise of towns and maybe one day whole cities that are indigenous too, that will destroy the rainforest too. But because it's necessary, quote unquote, to drive the economy, to keep things going. So we shouldn't think of indigenous people either as somehow almost like forest spirits detached from the human world. No, these are human people with real economic interests too. I think the difference is we need to look at the global market and see what are the factors that drive people to do what they do, to protect, to destroy, to, you know, cordon off areas, or to allow concessions and logging and other things like that. And to be fair, the COP30 was mentioned earlier. And these very things are being discussed right now in Brazil, but for the whole world, with impacts for all of us. And indigenous people have a huge opportunity to share their voice and are doing so. But the obstacles are there, as we said. So what do you think? I invite your questions, your comments, and thank you very much for listening.